Welcome to our first video chat of 2022 of Donkeys and Dragons, where we spend about 15 minutes chatting about any specific topic. Today, we're going to talk about the definition of done. So I'm Janet Gregory.
And I'm Lisa Crispin.
Let me just stop this slide share so that you can see us. Magic. Definition of done. Many teams that we see really struggle with that idea, the definition. And we were both talking about it, which led us to believe that we probably should talk about it on a video chat. We've seen lots of problems with different teams. Sometimes the definition is too complicated. I've seen it where they talk about the definition of done as individual to every single story. So it's all different. Or team members don't have the same understanding of what they mean. They have different ideas. Or sometimes organizations think that the definition of done should be the same for every single team. Or maybe it's so different for every team that there's not the same level of quality. It can go either way. And many times we see that there's no discipline. Even if they have a definition of done, they don't have the discipline to follow it.
Great. Yeah. It's interesting that they can make these, let's do this, and then it all goes out the window. And a lot of times the developers are maybe used to working in an environment where all they did was write the code and then they handed it off to somebody. They committed their changes, they created a pull request. Maybe that was their job before, right? And so they're in a habit, and habits are hard to break. So on one of my first Agile teams, we actually wrote on our task board back in the days of being in person, no story is done until it's tested. It was across the top. So we would remember every day as we were in stand-up, not to say I'm done, when what they meant was I've written some production code. So keep the need for testing visible. That's the key. Testing tasks in a story, or maybe testing charters in your backlog for an epic or a feature. I do hear people, even on the team where I work, say code complete. And if you use that term, you really want to be clear about what you mean. And some people just mean specifically, yes, I've written some production code, but does it have unit tests yet? I mean, it's just, there's such a gray area there. And so I feel like it's better to talk about story complete. We've got our unit tests done. We've got our story level exploratory testing. We've had a design review, a code review, whatever. And we may do more testing, especially at different levels. And maybe we're finished testing at the story level, but we're going to do some additional testing with other teams or something. Everybody needs to remain involved with that. It's not a handoff to somebody else. Sure. And my current team has a validation column on our Kanban board, which is, there's a lot of controversy around that. And even in our team, we talk about it a lot because we're doing trunk-based development, and we're using feature flags. Why do we need this column? We're testing as we go, but we've decided for now it makes it visible to the product owners that they may want to do some acceptance testing. And also it's just a nice way to visualize, here's what's queued up to release, because we release a few times a week. So here's what's ready to go. Are we ready to release? And so, it's a nice visual for that. Maybe validation is the wrong name for that column.
As long as you all know what it means. That's the important piece, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I would probably rename that to something else, but that would be me.
Yeah, just to be clear about it, because as new people join the team, you have to keep explaining it over and over.
Yeah, and those words mean they're very important. They really are. I know you mentioned levels, and a couple of things that we've tried when we help teams. When I help teams, especially when I go in, I talk about levels of precision. And when I say levels of precision, I mean a release. Whether you release every 3 months or every, at every feature, whatever that means. But a release usually has many features or could have many features. Features have many stories, stories have many tasks. So each of those is a different level. And I think if we start using that to talk about definition of done. So you talked about story done.
Mhm.
And I think we can talk a little bit different to also mean feature done. Make that, call it out, be specific, because what you have for feature done is quite a bit different than story done.
Mhm.
And even release done, right? You can define 3 different levels of done. So if I use things like models like the Agile testing quadrants, for example,
Mhm.
and we're not talking about that today, but story done might include the quadrant 1 and 2 tests, which would
Mhm.
be things like the unit tests and all of the functional tests that we think of as we're coding and before we're coding, right? It should include all the automation that you're doing for the unit level and API level, maybe even exploratory testing at the story level if the story demands it, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So for feature done, or epic, if you choose that word, you probably have many stories, maybe a whole lot, maybe just a few, but those would probably be more of the quadrant 3 and 4 tests. Right? You might even write test charters as stories, as you like to do them, Lisa,
Mhm. Mhm.
or some kind of tasks to be visible. But again, that automation wouldn't be maybe at the API level, but things like the quality attributes, things like whatever you automate for security or load testing, the workflow automation through the user interface, because by the time the feature is complete, you know that your UI isn't going to change anymore, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Database either. And exploratory tests are probably much bigger here, feature and system level, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then for release done, that release checklist that everybody always has, have you finished it? Have you done that end-to-end testing with other systems maybe that are impacted? Or your database upgrade scripts, have you tested them? Your third-party upgrades. I don't know. There's could be lots and lots of things. So I think it's important when we say done, a story done is quite a bit different, or could be quite a bit different than feature done or release done.
Mhm. Yeah, hopefully we're using the principle of making our stories small and granular and things we can do iteratively and incrementally, and so that we can manage our workload more predictably. And I really like using the quadrants that way to help us visualize of, here's what we want to be done on the story level if we can, and then moving on to the other things. And remembering, making it visible. You mentioned the UI level test on the right hand side. We have to make sure, like the other tester and I on our team, we always have to make sure somebody wrote a ticket to do the UI level test for an epic, because a lot of times, again, there's an assumption we'll do it.
Yep.
But we might forget if we don't
Yeah.
write a story to do that.
Yes.
So it's important to do those things. And, we want to make sure, like a big thing too, for where I'm working right now is coordination with other teams. So you maybe need to coordinate testing with other teams, do cross-team testing, and then coordinating deployments. We just had this situation this week where we were all ready to roll something out to production, and we realized, well, this other team has to deploy something first and they're not ready. So we actually had to revert the change out of our trunk so that we could deploy other things. So,
which is an issue all by itself, right?
yeah, and keeping it visible. I mean, there was a link to the other story in the Jira ticket, but it's easy to forget those things when you're like, yeah, let's go, let's release, let's deploy. So, with just having those dependencies, making it visible, just reminds us. Also like having pictures. So some people, there's a tester on another team that uses plant UML so that he can visualize those dependencies in a more graphic way.
That's a good idea.
I really like that too.
I do.
But there's lots of things we need to do before we're ready to turn something on in production. And again, our things are all behind a feature flag, but when, even so, we want to be careful about getting that code out there. But we might need internal documentation, external documentation. We might need to train operations people, customer support people, coordinating with marketing. You know, maybe there's a
Oh,
marketing program to go along with it, or
for
maybe
sure.
there are things, you know, in our situation, marketing does some of the work on the website. So those things all have to be coordinated.
Yeah.
And are there infrastructure changes that are going to happen? And, you know, are we working together with our site reliability engineers or whoever? Again, that's another thing that I always make sure we write a story for. What
Yes.
monitoring do we need? Do we need a new dashboard? Do we need new alerts? Let's make sure we write stories for those up front so that we don't forget to do those.
Yeah. And if you have a definition of done for each story, it would be, you know, complete the acceptance test, whatever that might be, right? It doesn't have to be specific for each story if you make it generic enough. I know that sometimes I run into teams that say, our definition of done means putting it in production for each story done. And I kind of look at it and I think, but you're releasing every 2 months. Does that mean you can't get your story to done? So you know, your velocity essential is 0 forever, right? So there's, how do we make that distinction? What can we do to get it finished, right? So we can say this story is done, but yet still take into account a lot of those other things for the feature.
Yep.
I know you talked about set a story for doing your UI testing. One of the things that I've done is create a story, like when you're slicing your feature into stories, is to say, put an extra story in that says, finish this feature.
Oh.
What does that mean? It would be, the tasks would be writing the UI automation. It might be completing that documentation, right? So for story done might be getting the documentation, getting the content, but for feature done, maybe that's when you make it pretty and add dots or whatever else you need to do, right? But thinking about all of those things when you're first splitting your feature helps you remember to get it, that is part of feature done. And I think that by making that distinction, it helps people remember that kind of thing as well.
Definitely. And just continue to have those conversations so we're all know what we mean and using the same terminology and stuff as well.
Oh, it is. Because that's part of the problem, right? As you mentioned before, if a dev says, I'm done, the story is not done, because
no, but a product owner might hear that.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And then 2 days later, why are you still working on that?
Yeah. Oh, I've seen testers have testing done, like they define it that way. And yeah, do it the other way around. So the biggest thing is remember to keep it simple. Maybe there's a standard for the company, but teams can add specific things for their needs, right? I like this definition of done to be simple enough so that every team member can say, this is what it means, right? And list it off. Because you want it to be consistent. And it could be as simple as all identified automation must be complete. All identified human-centric testing must be complete. Product owner must accept story. Maybe it's as simple as that, right?
Yeah. And you know, like I say, it's all about, well, not all about, but a lot of it's about your habits and where people have worked before, what they did before, what they're used to. And I think having a checklist right in your online story ticket, you know, sometimes you can build those in and it just helps you build that habit. It helps you be disciplined. And again, disciplined, I heard somebody say today, being disciplined doesn't mean being regimented.
For sure.
Because there may be variations on different stories and different features. But you know, I've been on teams where if we didn't have that checklist in every story, we did forget because it was a new habit that we're trying to build.
Yes.
And you know, because we were going to talk about this, I looked at my current team's definition of done because we don't have it embedded in each of our stories.
Okay.
It's in our values document, oddly enough. And I looked at it because I'm like, do we need to be putting it in the story? And I look at it and think, oh no, we generally do all those things. So we've internalized it. Again, it might be nice for newer people, but we do ask new people to read the values document and go over that with them. But generally, I think people have kind of internalized, yeah, this is how we do. There are things we're not necessarily great at, like doing exploratory testing on the story level. Different levels of goodness there. But as you said, not every story even needs that. So,
exactly.
So yeah, you may not need a checklist after a while, but do whatever you need to do to make it visible.
All right. Well, I think we should be wrapping up this session. The time goes so fast when you're only doing 15 minutes.
Yeah, so we've the Agile Testing Fellowship. You can find out more about us on our website, and these are our books, which are available. And our Agile Testing Condensed is available now in 8 languages, and the latest one being German. So we're really excited that that's being made more accessible, thanks to our wonderful friends who do the translations for us.
For sure.
And we'd love for you to get in touch. We'd love to hear your questions or hear about your experiences. And so please feel free to email us or tweet at us or LinkedIn, link us in.
Link us. We're pretty easy to find.
Yeah. So that's it for this month's Donkeys and Dragons video chat. Get in touch if you have any topics you'd like us to cover.
Yes. So see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.